Are you struggling to set boundaries with people? Do people take advantage of you? Do you have trouble saying no to people and your time gets squandered away helping others? If this sounds like you, then you might need help learning to set boundaries, better boundaries. Today, we're going to speak with Sharon Martin, who is a therapist and a friend, and she has just released a new book called Better Boundaries Workbook. I'm so excited to be giving her a testimonial right there on the home page, on the first page. And I love this book so much. I am a big boundaries person, and I've never seen anything this complete and this wonderful. So we're going to talk about it today. We're going to learn about setting boundaries and how it can help you. So if you struggle with setting boundaries, stay tuned and let's watch Sharon Martin. This is Tracy Malone from Narcissist Abuse Support. If you are struggling with trying to figure out what happened to you, trying to learn how to move on, trying to find resources, please visit my website, narcissistabusesupport.com. Without any further ado, let's welcome Sharon. Hi, Sharon. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks, Tracy.
It's always so wonderful to have you, and I'm so excited to present to the world Better Boundaries Workbook. So if this is the Better Boundaries, how are two of them? Are they the better ones?
Yeah, the best boundaries with two, huh?
I'm so excited that I got a second one because I'm actually teaching a class on boundaries next Tuesday to my in-person support group, and I'm going to make it a prize.
Oh, perfect. Perfect. Love that.
You take pictures of it and go buy it, and then the one person walks away with your prize. So thank you so much for sending me these books. All right. So you have been doing boundaries for as long as I have. Before I knew you, I met you because of that a long time ago. In fact, I was looking at my website this morning, and you became a therapist on my website in 2016. I was like, wow, I've known her a long time. So I'm so blessed to have you here to talk about boundaries, because the people that we're talking about and to today are victims of narcissistic abuse. And, survivors that have come through this are usually caring souls. They were taught seemingly good qualities like, do the right thing and do unto others and be selfless and put other people's needs before yours. Eeks, forgive and forget. And also the things that they were taught were rarely having good boundary skills. And so how has this quality, besides it being really good narc bait, because if you're all these loving, caring, forgiving things, you make good narc bait, having no boundaries also makes you really good narc bait. How has not having strong boundaries added to their current situations?
Yeah, I think it all goes together so seamlessly, really. Like everything that you're talking about is directly connected to the idea of boundaries. We can think about boundaries in a couple of different ways. And I think part of it is that inability or that struggle to set limits, to say no to people. And that's sort of that classic, I think, definition of boundaries is, right, the limit setting piece of it, which of course it's hard with a lot of different people, especially if you've been socialized, you've grown up being told that that's not okay, that you are going to make people angry, or you're going to disappoint people, people won't like you, they're going to reject you, they're going to leave, right? That becomes a very scary prospect to actually say no or to have a differing opinion. And then that sort of moves us into, a slightly different aspect of boundaries, which is boundaries also help to define who we are as individuals so that we're not, kind of encompassed, sort of overtaken by somebody else's more, dominant kind of personality. And that, again, that sort of is related to us feeling like we need to be more passive, and then it's not safe. And it often really is not safe to, like I said, have a differing opinion or speak up about something that is not the narcissist's opinion or what they're looking for. If you're saying no to something that they want, it doesn't go over well, obviously. But anyway, I mean, this sort of, I almost think of it as sort of a shrinking of our sense of self, that, we have to kind of, mold ourselves into who the other person wants us to be. And that really, I think, is a survival skill, that if we're going to, be okay in any sense of the word in this kind of relationship, right? We've got to sort of be that chameleon who is, always paying attention to what's going on around us and being on high alert, so that we don't do something that's going to set the other person off. And so it's a little more of a sort of a subtle, or less obvious, I think, aspect of boundaries, is being able to, have a boundary that really sort of maintains who you are as a person. And by that, I mean, things like your values, your ideas, your goals, the things that you like to do, your own friends and your own relationships, and things of that sort, that, a lot of that tends to fall away when people are in abusive relationships, where somebody is controlling what they can and can't do, either overtly or, in a, less obvious way still, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's really helpful. Again, people need to understand that despite the fact that boundaries with a narcissist didn't necessarily work, that we need to start to learn them, because we want to be able to deploy these not only to the person who's not listening in your life, but also to learn to set them with your children, learn to set them with your neighbors, your friends. Once we become shut down on boundaries, we just are fearful of putting it out there to anyone. And although it might be hard with the narcissist, it takes some skills, and we'll talk about that in a little while, but we have to learn this skill, and we have to perfect this. And that's what this book is so amazing for. Ever since I got it last week, I've just been like, oh my God, there's so many page dog-eared in here and little red marks going, oh my God, that I'm going to do this book and do the work in here, and just be like, you know what? It's time for me to refresh this stuff. We can always keep learning. And the exercise that you have in here are brilliant. They're just diving in, and you're just like, oh my God, I didn't think of it that way. Oh, that's a really good way to learn this. I'm so excited to have people learn about this. I always tell people that, a boundary is the rules for someone to be in your life. And they've been disempowered and go, I can tell people no. It's just so foreign to people who have been through abuse. So why is it so hard for people to set boundaries?
Well, I think that's where we get into that. The fear is definitely one of the big barriers. And then I think guilt is another one. And I don't think we can completely separate, these two feelings, because I think most people who are struggling with boundaries experience both of them. And I think, as you were saying, if you have had experiences where setting boundaries has not gone well, it is natural that you are going to be fearful. You're going to, be reluctant to do it again. And I hear from a lot of people who feel like they've almost, I think, gotten to almost a hopeless kind of place where they feel like, well, boundaries don't work. Like, I've tried to do it and it just doesn't work. And I think, going back to what you were saying earlier, we want to remember that some people are more receptive to boundaries than others. And if you have been in a relationship that has been abusive with a narcissist, you have most likely had that experience of boundaries don't work. But I think what we want to remember is setting boundaries with other people may be a very different experience, especially once you get more of those skills under your belt. Because it's sort of like apples and oranges, I think, here, to compare, sort of a typical person and a narcissistic person's response to boundaries is really different. And I think just sort of reminding yourself of that can be a helpful place to start, is that not everybody responds terribly to limits and boundaries. There are people, quite a few people actually. But one of the things I also talk about is that even people who are receptive may need some time to adjust when you start setting boundaries. If you have been, fairly passive in like a lot of areas of your life, and you start showing up at work saying, oh, I don't, I'm not able to do that, or that doesn't work for me. Your coworkers or your boss might be taken back a little bit, and they might need, some time to adjust to kind of the new you with the healthy boundaries. But that doesn't necessarily mean they can't get on board with it if we give them some time and some experience with you, sort of doing that new kind of behavior. But again, I think going back to what we were talking about, the guilt and the fear, I really want people to also remember that even though those things get in the way of us setting boundaries, the feeling, there's nothing wrong with the feeling, and it's completely understandable. Like I said, that you're going to feel fearful. And then the guilt is also, it's something that we learn. It's the feeling is based on the belief that you're doing something wrong by setting the boundary, right? And if you kind of do that work to look back and say, where did I get this idea? How did I come to believe that it's wrong for me to say, no, I don't want to be touched that way, or I'm sorry, I'm busy, I can't do that. And, once we start looking back, you'll probably start seeing a lot of places. And again, I mean, this may be where there's some very specific examples that stand out in your memory where it was, blatant that somebody actually said that, or there was a very clear experience of it. But we also just are socialized in this society, I think, especially for women, that we should be making people happy. We should be taking care of people. We should be self-sacrificing. And so that kind of mindset goes against what we're talking about here. Or I should clarify that. I don't think it really does, but it feels like it does, right? That's what we're thinking is going to go from, selfless, people-pleasing over here to selfish. And, I have to remember there's a lot of space in between there, right? And that's where we want to end up in, thinking about healthy boundaries as this middle place of, self-acceptance, self-worth. It's not that we're going to completely discount other people's needs or ideas or feelings. Like, we're going to consider all of that, but we're not going to not consider our own, right? And that's what's really been happening. And that's the problem areas that we have been dismissing, minimizing our feelings and our needs, for so long. I think for some of us, we really don't even know what we need anymore, or what we want, or what we're feeling, because, the disconnection, has just happened for such a long time. But again, that's sort of, I think, part of that process is that reconnecting with yourself and trying to tune into, okay, what do I actually need in this situation? And then for that to be okay, for that to be completely valid, as valid as anybody else's needs, really.
Absolutely. And, victims often feel, because when they've been controlled, they often feel that, oh, if I ask for something, I'm controlling. So they interpret it in a negative way because of the things that have been controlling them, versus, getting out there and actually saying, no, I don't want to do that. It doesn't make me happy. You go ahead. I'll be fine. It correlates to that in their brain. So they struggle with that additionally. On 40 of your book, which is, I like highlighted it, red flagged it. Setting boundaries makes you feel guilty. We talked about that, but I want to see if anyone can relate to these specific things. And again, you're supposed to check these boxes in this wonderful book. I shouldn't need or want anything. If I do need or want something, I shouldn't ask for it. It's my responsibility to care for others. Being selfless is a virtue. Again, those recordings I talked about in the beginning that you come into your life with because of the way you were raised, or, the circumstances. It's mean, rude to say no, right? All of these things are the things that we feel guilty about. And what's so good about this book, and it's looking at those things and going, oh man, that is me. And then the next question is like, what about this? And what about that? You're like, oh man, you're digging into not only the information, but then the work to actually,
Mm-hmm.
oh, how does that apply to me? Oh, I can see how that helps. Oh, I need that. Or, never did that. Let me learn this part. So there's so much
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. What I really hope for people is that, like you're saying, is that they gain some self-awareness, but that isn't attached to self-criticism, that there really is a sense of understanding why you're doing what you're doing. And like I said, I guess I feel like I can't say it enough. It's really, understanding that what's going on is a natural response to what you have been through.
Mm-hmm.
Our body, our mind is spectacular at being able to help us survive difficult situations,
Mm-hmm.
right? That doesn't mean we don't come out with some, bumps and bruises and scars and, those tapes in our heads and so forth. But, what we have learned to do was all necessary. It was what we needed to get through that situation. And if you're coming out on the other side, right, part of the healing work is learning how to, be different in relationships with people. And, part of that is learning how to set boundaries with people, because that, I think part of that also creates this sort of mutuality, this balance maybe in relationships where there's more equity. There's the ability for both people to ask for what they need. And there's also, respect that I can't always give you what you need in this relationship. And there's room for compromise, at least on many things. And so it doesn't have this real one-sided, feeling like one person's doing all the giving and one person's doing all the taking, right? We want to kind of like bring that back to that sense of balance that I'm talking about, where it feels safe. And of course, I mean, it takes time, it takes practice. It takes, I think being in relationship with people who themselves are healthier, and, have that ability to listen, consider your needs that are true, can provide empathy and validation and some of the things that, you really don't get from people who are narcissistic.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. This is all like to build you up for the next chapter of your life, right? Where
Yeah.
you've been, you can't change it. You can forgive yourself. You can go, oh, I didn't know, but now I can. And now we choose to say that other person was the old me and I didn't know better. And now I've learned these new skills and I'm going to be stronger. And it just empowers people.
Mm-hmm.
The first time after a boundary class in my women's group, and somebody comes in the next week and go, oh my God, I set a boundary with my husband and it worked. 50 years later, the first boundary she ever set. I mean, it's life-changing, right? And it doesn't have to be over huge things. It's little things along your life that you just scratch your head and go, that's weird. Instead go, you know what? That really bothered me when you did that. Blank boundary set, right? And so finding the courage, because a lot of people are so fearful, as you said, to like get it out of their mouth.
Yeah.
The guilt and the fear. And once it happens, you get to figure out if they're going to be boundary busters or honor boundaries, right? It's a test for all people in your life. And it's important that people learn this skill, especially when they've been through this.
Yeah. But I think also what you're talking about is like, you do need to go slow. Like one of the things that I talk about in the book, and there are some sections in there that kind of walk you through how to start. And one of the things that I suggest to people is trying to identify, what I call just like a safe person, somebody that you can start to set a boundary with, but that you feel like that person is most likely going to be receptive. And if you can find one person like that, that's your place to start. That's where you start practicing. You don't start setting boundaries with the most difficult person in your life. right? It's like if I want to learn how to play basketball, I don't show up at the NBA practice and try to do it with the pros, right? I start in the backyard with the little thing, right? Somewhere where it's okay to make some mistakes. A person who's going to be supportive of you trying to make these changes.
Absolutely. And again, when boundaryless people, that's a new word, I think, go and actually people set a boundary on them, it can feel so foreign, can feel like the control. They don't know how, and they might even think their friends are being bossy until they actually analyze it and go, oh, that's what it is. They're not just being a crazy bitch. They're actually like setting a boundary. It's hard for people to recognize it. Like I'm thinking of my people and how they have someone set a boundary on them and they almost go into freeze. Like, oh, did I do something wrong? The guilt comes in, right? And that's a thing, a hurdle people have to really understand. Can you explain a little more about that?
Well, if I'm getting you correctly, it sounds like part of what you're talking about is this idea that boundaries go both ways. Is that right? As we learn how to set boundaries, it's not just us setting boundaries with other people and saying, no, I don't like that, or I can't do that. That doesn't work for me. But it's also that we have to respect that other people are going to set limits with us. And maybe, a third component is that we also need to set limits with ourselves. But that's a little bit more. But yes, I mean, we also need to be able to accept no for an answer from other people. And sometimes that's really hard to do. I mean, if we're honest about it, if we want somebody to, do something for us that we feel is important, or, we're not always going to get, the other person saying, oh, sure, that's fine, I can do that, right? I mean, that's just not realistic. A good part of boundaries is sort of the negotiating of, I have a need and you have a need, and they could be in conflict. I mean, I would say like that's a very core piece of any relationship, is that we don't all need or want the same thing at the same time. Right. But we need to have a way of communicating about that and problem solving, how we're going to, both get most of our needs met most of the time. Right. It can't be 100%. And then I think this sort of brings us into, this other aspect of boundaries, which is recognizing that if somebody else can't meet all of my needs all of the time, what can I do about that? If I still have a need, is there something that I can do to meet some of my own needs? And this is, it's not clear cut in the sense that we can say, meet, 10% of your needs yourself, and, 90%, should be relational. And that's probably not a good example of percentages either, but the point being is, even if you're married or in an ongoing relationship with somebody, it's not realistic to expect that, that person can meet all your needs. I think that's where we get into these, false ideas that somebody else is going to make us happy all of the time, right? And I think we've all heard things to the effect of, happiness is an inside job, essentially, right? Like that we have to take responsibility for it. And this relates to boundaries in the sense that we need to think about, well, if I can't, get somebody else to make a change or to do something that feels like I want them to do, what are my options? What can I do? Because I don't want people to go away feeling like, your boundaries rest on whether somebody else is going to do what you've asked them to do, or whether your boundaries, are, require somebody else to make a change. I mean, that's one form of a boundary, is to ask somebody, could you do this? Could you not do this? And again, like there's a place for that, but there's also a place for saying, okay, especially if the other person is not going to make the change that you've asked them to make, right? We don't want to feel like, okay, and now I'm helpless. There's nothing I can do here. I'm, just going to be miserable because this person keeps doing X, Y, and Z that I feel is offensive or disrespectful or hurtful to me. We need to think, okay, well, what is it that I can do? And the answer to that depends obviously on the particulars of the situation. But what I'm talking about is things like, well, do I need to get up and leave the room if this person is speaking to me in a way that doesn't, feel good to me? Do I need to block this person's number on my phone rather than continue to just ask them to stop texting me if, they're not going to respect that? You think about what's in my power to do about this situation. And those are very simple examples. Obviously, things can be much more complicated. And I think we also start to get into, the reality that sometimes the things that you can do are not ideal solutions. But there's usually something that you can do to improve the situation for yourself or to protect yourself, to keep yourself safe, or not, continue to be, in a situation where somebody's taking advantage of you. It's important to spend that time and do the, sort of reflective work and some brainstorming and say, okay, what is within my control in this situation?
I love that because again, looking at the survivors that I work with, we're all in the go, no contact, don't talk to them again, off with their head kind of a thing when a violation happens. And if this is your situation and a narcissist and you can get away, that's certainly your options, right? But I think also they have to realize that just because they didn't listen to that boundaries doesn't mean they're on the I don't talk to them ever again list. Negotiation, like you were saying, and let's come up with something that maybe meets both of our needs, or we compromise, or you make that decision that I don't want them in my life. Not automatically go to the off with their head, they didn't listen to my boundary. And again, what can we do to make that happen? And that's what this workbook is going to do. It's like really asking you those thoughtful, provoking questions that are going to be like, oh, I didn't know I had that power. That's a good idea. Right about this. This is a great thing to do too, right? So what other things are they going to learn in this book? Because there's like,
well, I'm glad you asked, because I had something in mind.
Awesome.
Which is the other thing that I spent a lot of time putting into that book is a lot of communication skills. So how to communicate assertively. So there's a lot in there. I think it's chapter 5, mostly. But this is one of the things that you have control over is how do you ask somebody to make a change? How do you ask for what you need in a relationship? And I think this, again, is one of the reasons why, people experience boundaries not working is sometimes it's the way the message is received, but sometimes it's also the way the message is delivered. And again, a lot of us just never learned how to communicate assertively. We're familiar with being too passive, and we're familiar with people being aggressive, or we may be aggressive ourselves at times. But again, there's this nice middle ground called assertiveness, and that's where we want to be, where we can be kind. And there's nothing, mean or harsh about it, but it's also clear and it's specific and it's direct. So that this sort of maximizes the chances that the other person is going to understand and be receptive. And then we also want to think about things like our tone of voice, the timing. I'll just mention like one tip that I have for people, is that boundaries don't necessarily need to be set in the moment. Now, sometimes they might. Again, there's exceptions to everything. If it's a safety issue, then yes. But I think this is, again, one of the really common mistakes that people make is they feel like, oh, you've done something to cross a boundary. I need to respond to that immediately. And our response usually comes out as aggressive. We are reactive. We say things harshly. We're blaming. And what kind of response are you going to get from that, right? Not that receptive one that we're looking for. And so it's often really helpful for us to, do the work and say, okay, what is it that I need? What is it that I want from this other person? How can I communicate that to them? And when can I communicate that so that, again, we want to make sure the person's listening. You don't want to be, setting the boundary when the person's sitting there watching TV or playing on their phone or they've had too much to drink. These things seem really simple, but I mean, how many times do we do that where we're angry in the moment? And I think this is the other thing, is that for a lot of us, we go so long without saying anything that it's piling up, right? And we're stuffing it down. And then eventually we got that last straw, and then out it all comes. And again, it's understandable, but it's not very effective in terms of communication. And right, I mean, so some of this, again, is our own personal work of managing our emotions, making sure that we, are calm and collected, and we're taking the time to deal with our emotions, perhaps in other ways that, so that it's not sort of all bubbling out in a way that I think either feels uncontrollable or again is hurtful to other people. We want to, make sure that we are taking care of ourselves. We're, practicing good self-care and stress management, and we've got outlets for the things that are stressful and difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And timing is everything. That is what often is the biggest mistake, is you're in an argument and, blah, and again, walk away, breathe, come back. If you picked up this book, you'd be doing exercises to self-reflect. Why did that day happen? And why did I feel that way? Well, how did I feel that way? Is this happening? What could I have said? And then you come back with a script because you thought it through, and you're going to be much more efficient. And they might be more receptive because it's not that heat of the moment when, like, it's not going to work with anyone. Like a narcissist, once you ping that dark side, you're not going back till tomorrow. So, just like, they have to know that timing is everything. And that's what I love about the book, is there's all these practicing boundary setting parts, right? And think about that. There's like, sit down and pick up a journal and write out, well, that didn't work. And maybe it didn't work because it was the timing, or I could have done it this way. And you learn, you almost do like a recon after you've done it by looking at it from a higher perspective. And then you learn from it and go, all right, next time I'll do it. And I'll wait till they're not mad, and I'll get this. And this is what I really wanted. And this is why it's so important to me. So you have things about setting boundaries at work, which is helpful, your partner, your children, your friends, difficult people, and even like practice setting boundaries with yourself. So what are the kind of things that people have to set boundaries with for themselves?
Oh, all kinds of stuff. Another way that we can think about boundaries with ourselves is the concept of self-management, right? So I also need to say no to myself. I can't just let myself do everything that I want to do all of the time, right? I mean, it's sort of the adulting, that we need to do, which is, okay, I need to go to bed on time, or I need to get this project finished. I need to pay attention to my finances so that I'm not overspending. It's all of those kinds of tasks where, we, like I said, we need to set limits for ourselves and know what is okay for us to do and what's not okay for us to do. And that, again, it's personal. I can't, say that we should both, have the same bedtime, or we should, both do the same amount of exercise or watch the same amount of TV. I think social media is one of those big areas that people struggle with, is, how do I manage the amount of time that I spend online or on my phone, right? And recognizing, well, what works for you? What's the right amount for you is going to be different than the right amount for me. And once we recognize it, then we can start setting some goals for ourselves. And again, I mean, it's one of those things that I think so many of us didn't learn in childhood. I mean, you can especially think about your own parents growing up, and did they model self-management? Did they stick to routines? Did they have a healthy lifestyle? And again, this often sort of shows up in the way that our parents manage themselves and their own lives, but it also shows up in the way that they parent us. Typically, if a parent is not managing, themselves very well, they're also not setting those kinds of limits for their children either. So
their children, like,
yeah,
one thing for them to not even been doing them, or those that taught their children, they learned by example because they were seeing it, but also, oh, your little friend Johnny doesn't, here's what you should do. Here's what a boundary is, my dear. So if you had that and you had that kind of support, then
yeah.
it became a more comfortable thing. But if you didn't, this is still not too late. No matter how old you are, no matter where you are in the world, setting boundaries is the core of keeping away nasty narcissists again, because again, they don't want someone with strong boundaries. They want someone that's going to go along with whatever they say, forgive them when they do wrong, and move on to the next, catastrophic event. They don't want someone with strong boundaries. So how do we test somebody's boundary? Let's just end there, because I'm like, that's such an important thing. You're meeting someone, or you start this, how do you test their boundaries?
That's a great question. And I think what we want to do is like what we were talking about just a little bit ago, is we want to remember that when we're looking at somebody else's boundaries, we want to see if they can accept the limits that we set for them, but also the reverse. So it's not this one-way street that but can they set limits with us too? Right. And then, right. I mean, can they respect the response as well? So I think it can be something really simple, like canceling plans with somebody. How do they react to if you canceled at the last minute? Are they angry with you? Are they understanding? I think, I think part of the challenge is that it takes a while. Like I don't want to say like we need to be testing people all of the time, but we want to be aware. It's not a one-time thing. And so I think maybe that's a better way to think about it, is to have an awareness of other people's boundaries and how they're setting them for themselves, how they're setting them with other people in their lives, how they're setting them with you, and can they respect boundaries that other people set, with them as well. Right. It's that two-way street there. And just kind of be, paying attention to that, I think, all of the time, because you're right, it is a lot. There's a lot of information to be gathered there. It's just sort of an element of, we think about, well, how is this person interacting with me? But also we want to be noticed, how are they interacting with other people? How are they talking about what's going on at work or with their family, with their friends? Like, what are the qualities of those relationships? Do they, again, they may not ever, the word boundary may not ever be used, but, you can look for it, right, in the stories about what's going on for them and what makes them upset, and or what doesn't. Do they, they able to talk about, respecting people who are different than them, have different ideas about things, and, things along those lines.
Perfect answer. I love that. Now, I know that we're going to make everyone go buy one of these books. We'll put a link down below. But, a free gift, which,
oh yes, I almost forgot.
It's so exciting because I did it this morning. So we'll talk about that after you tell them what it is.
Yes, the mystery. Yes, I've got a great little quiz that will help you figure out what kind of boundary setter you are. Like, what is the particular struggle? There's different ways that people struggle with their boundaries. And the quiz is, it takes 2, maybe 3 minutes tops. It's really quick, so it's not a big time investment. But once you take it, you'll get your score immediately, and it will tell you what kind of boundary setter you are. And then you'll get some information specifically geared towards that type of boundary style to help you make the particular shifts that you need to move towards those healthier boundaries.
Very cool quiz. I took it this morning when we got on, and I said, do I want to take it the way I am now or the way I was when I learned? So I said, let me start at the bottom, and then I'm going to do it again later. Sorry, but I'm doing it again later, and I know that it's going to be the complete opposite, but I wanted to see, because that's where my people are in this vulnerable state. And I was like, this is so awesome. It really was like 5 questions and then boom, but it really made you think. So if you guys are struggling with boundaries, please do yourself a favor, get this book and do the work. It's like a quarter of what it would cost you to go to a therapist for an hour. And I don't know, how long did it take you? 1,000,000 hours to write? Get this brilliant woman into this book to make it easy for you. Dig yourself out and change the patterns, because it's really not too late, everybody. So thank you, Sharon, so much for being with us and giving us all this helpful information. You're generous with your knowledge, and it shows in this book. So can't wait till everybody gets it in their hands and we change the world one boundary at a time.
Love it. Oh, thanks so much. It's a pleasure to chat with you, and I hope it is helpful and really supportive to people.
I'm sure it will be. Thank you.
Oh, thanks.